In 1921, a thriving black neighborhood was bombed from the air by white mobs, and America erased it from history books. This is just one of countless stories of black excellence met with violent suppression. The uncomfortable truth? Systemic racism wasn't an accident. It was by design. Today, we're going to uncover the deliberate policies, forgotten massacres, and calculated destruction that shaped Black America. This isn't about individual prejudice. This is about a system engineered to extract wealth, suppress progress, and maintain power. What you're about to learn will change how you see American history forever. You were taught that after the Civil War, America tried to help freed slaves integrate into society. That's not what happened. Here's the shocking reality they don't want you to know. Reconstruction wasn't a failure. It was sabotaged. Between 1865 and 1877, Black Americans achieved unprecedented political power. They held over 2,000 political offices, including 22 congressmen, 2 senators, and numerous state legislators. Black communities built 4,000 schools and founded universities that still exist today. But this success terrified white power structures. The Compromise of 1877 deliberately ended federal protection for black citizens in exchange for settling a disputed presidential election. This wasn't incompetence. It was a calculated trade-off that sacrificed black lives for white political power. What followed was the systematic destruction of black political participation through Jim Crow laws, poll taxes, and literacy tests designed to be impossible to pass. Within 20 years, black political representation dropped to nearly zero. But political suppression was just the beginning. When black communities tried to build their own prosperity, America responded with violence that would shock you. What if I told you that American cities experienced military coups, with democratically elected governments overthrown by armed white supremacist militias? It happened repeatedly, and it's been erased from most history books. Wilmington, North Carolina, 1898. A legally elected, racially integrated city government was overthrown at gunpoint by white supremacists. They burned black-owned newspapers, murdered dozens of black citizens, and installed their own government. This was America's only successful coup d'etat, until recently. New Orleans, 1874. The White League, a paramilitary organization, attempted to overthrow the racially integrated Reconstruction government. Federal troops had to intervene to restore the elected officials. Colfax, Louisiana, 1873. White supremacists massacred over 100 black men defending a courthouse where Republican officials had taken refuge. The Supreme Court's response? They ruled that the federal government couldn't prosecute the killers because it violated states' rights. These weren't isolated incidents of racial violence. They were coordinated military campaigns to overthrow democracy itself when it included black voices. Even when black communities rebuilt and prospered despite this violence, America found new ways to destroy their success. Imagine building a thriving neighborhood with banks, newspapers, hotels, and businesses, only to watch it burn to the ground by your own government. This happened over and over again in Black America. Tulsa's Greenwood District, 1921, known as Black Wall Street. It was one of the wealthiest black communities in America. In 2 days, white mobs, aided by local police and the National Guard, destroyed 35 city blocks. They dropped incendiary bombs from airplanes, making this one of the first aerial bombings of American citizens on American soil. Over 300 black residents were killed, 10,000 were left homeless, and $50 million in today's currency was destroyed. Insurance companies refused to pay claims, and the city changed zoning laws to prevent rebuilding. But Tulsa wasn't unique. Rosewood, Florida, 1923. Entire black town destroyed. East St. Louis, Illinois, 1917. Hundreds killed in race massacre. Elaine, Arkansas, 1919. Over 200 black farmers killed for trying to organize. The pattern was always the same. black economic success triggered white violence, often with government support. Then the destruction was justified, ignored, or erased from history. When burning down communities became too visible, America developed more subtle methods of economic destruction. The 13th Amendment didn't end slavery. It moved it into the prison system. Here's how America legally maintained forced black labor for another century. The 13th Amendment contains a crucial loophole, except as punishment for crime. Southern states immediately exploited this by creating black codes, laws that criminalized normal behavior, but only for black people. Vagrancy laws made it illegal to be unemployed. Apprenticeship laws allowed white employers to claim black children as workers. Breach of contract became a criminal offense, trapping black workers in exploitative labor contracts. The convict leasing system was born. Black men were arrested for minor offenses, convicted in sham trials, and leased to private companies. These companies worked prisoners harder than slavery because they didn't own them. They had no incentive to keep them alive. U.S. Steel, Tennessee Coal and Iron, and other major corporations built their fortunes on this system. Between 1880 and 1920, over 200,000 black men were forced into this slavery by another name. Even as convict leasing ended, America was designing new systems to control black economic mobility. What if the government created maps that determined whether your family could build wealth for generations? They did, and those maps still shape America today. In 1934, the Federal Housing Administration created color-coded maps rating neighborhoods for loan eligibility. Red zones, predominantly black neighborhoods, were deemed hazardous for investment. Banks were instructed never to lend there. This wasn't private discrimination. This was federal policy. The GI Bill promised home ownership to returning veterans, but black veterans were systematically excluded from the white neighborhoods where FHA loans were available. Between 1934 and 1962, the federal government backed $120 billion in home loans. Less than 2% went to non-white families. This single policy created the racial wealth gap that persists today. While white families built intergenerational wealth through home ownership, black families were trapped in rental properties in disinvested neighborhoods. The average white family today has 12 times the wealth of the average black family. This is why. But controlling where black families could live was just one part of a larger system of control. Separate but equal was never about equality. It was about maintaining an educated servant class while preventing black intellectual development. Under Jim Crow, Southern states spent 10 times more on white schools than black schools. But the inequality was designed, not accidental. White authorities understood that education was the pathway to economic and political power. Black schools received broken furniture, outdated textbooks, and no funding for science labs or libraries. The school year for black children was shortened to coincide with agricultural seasons, ensuring they remained available as cheap labor. Even after Brown versus Board, integration was resisted through massive resistance campaigns. Southern states shut down entire public school systems rather than integrate. Prince Edward County, Virginia, closed all public schools for 5 years rather than allow black and white children to learn together. When forced integration finally occurred, white families fled to private schools or suburban districts, taking tax dollars with them. Today's school segregation is more extreme than it was in the 1960s, not by law, but by design. By the 1970s, as civil rights laws made old forms of control illegal, America needed a new system of mass black subjugation. What if I told you that America's drug war was designed not to stop drugs, but to destroy black communities and suppress political dissent? John Ehrlichman, Nixon's domestic policy advisor, admitted the truth in 1994. We couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. The numbers reveal the design: crack cocaine, predominantly used in black communities. 5-year minimum sentence for 5 grams. Powder cocaine, predominantly used by whites. 5-year minimum sentence for 500 grams. Same drug, different form, 100-to-1 sentencing disparity. This wasn't about public safety. Cocaine use was actually declining when these laws passed. This was about mass incarceration as population control. Between 1980 and 2000, the U.S. prison population increased by 790%. Today, America has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of its prisoners. A black man has a 1 in 3 chance of being imprisoned in his lifetime. Mass incarceration served another purpose: removing black voters from the political process. Jim Crow is dead, but voter suppression evolved. Today's methods are more sophisticated, but just as effective at silencing black political power. Felony disenfranchisement laws, many dating to the post-Reconstruction era, now prevent 5.2 million Americans from voting, disproportionately black men targeted by the drug war. Modern voter suppression uses surgical precision to target black voters. Exact match laws that disqualify registrations for minor clerical errors. Voter ID laws in states where black citizens are less likely to have required documents. Polling place closures concentrated in black neighborhoods. Voter roll purges that disproportionately remove black voters. North Carolina's 2013 voter law was struck down by federal courts for targeting black voters with almost surgical precision. The state had requested data on voting methods used by race, then eliminated the methods black voters used most. These aren't partisan political tactics. They're the continuation of a centuries-long project to exclude black voices from democracy. But perhaps the most shocking truth is how this oppression generated massive profits for those who designed it.
Every system of black oppression in America generated enormous wealth for white institutions. Racism wasn't just about hate, it was about money. Slavery wasn't just free labor. It was the foundation of American capitalism. Cotton picked by enslaved people generated 60% of America's export revenue. New York banks, Boston textile mills, and European manufacturers all profited from slave labor. Major corporations built their fortunes on convict leasing. U.S. Steel, Tennessee Coal and Iron, and countless others. The profits were so enormous that Alabama's state budget depended on leasing prisoners to private companies. The prison industrial complex generates $80 billion annually. Private prison corporations like Core Civic and Geo Group lobby for harsher sentencing laws to maintain their profits. They literally profit from human cages. Wall Street firms like Wells Fargo profited from predatory lending that targeted black communities, triggering the 2008 foreclosure crisis that destroyed black household wealth. Even today, the racial wealth gap generates profits. Predatory lenders, rent-to-own stores, and check-cashing businesses extract billions from communities excluded from traditional banking. Understanding this history reveals an uncomfortable truth about American prosperity. The uncomfortable truth? American prosperity was built on the systematic oppression and wealth extraction from black communities. This wasn't a side effect of American capitalism. It was the foundation. For 400 years, every time black Americans built wealth, political power, or community prosperity, it was destroyed by law, by violence, or by policy design. This wasn't random hatred. It was a calculated system of wealth extraction and political control. The Tulsa Massacre, convict leasing, redlining, the drug war, mass incarceration. These weren't separate injustices. They were components of an integrated system designed to maintain white economic and political supremacy. Today's racial wealth gap, educational inequalities, and political underrepresentation aren't the legacy of ancient history. They're the direct result of policies that continued into the 21st century. But here's what they really don't want you to know. This system required enormous effort to maintain. Laws had to be written, policies had to be implemented and violence had to be organized, which means it can be dismantled with equal effort and intention. The question isn't whether systemic racism exists. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is whether America has the courage to acknowledge this history and the commitment to build something better. Because until we confront the truth about how we got here, we can't honestly address where we're going. The choice is ours: continue the lie or face the truth and build the America we claim to be. This documentary is dedicated to the countless Black Americans whose stories were erased, whose achievements were destroyed, and whose resistance preserved hope for future generations.